Hi guys, today I had the pleasure of sitting down with a very dear friend of mine, Mr. Elton Apps. He used to work for my late father-in-law, Brian Davenport, and was my very first hire at NICES International Search back in 2005. We talk about his career journey going from the world of recruitment to in-house strategic recruitment to becoming the head of HR. I'll let him share the rest of his journey. I hope you enjoyed the chat as much as I did. Cheers. Mr. Apps,
Mr. Quinn,
how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
This has been, 18 years in the making?
Yeah,
When did we first meet?
2005.
That's the first time we actually met.
That's the first time we met. I had seen you slightly earlier,
Okay.
but you were dressed in the exact same clothes.
Really?
Yeah,
I wasn't in a wife beater.
that's what you were in, actually.
Where did we meet? We met at the cricket club. That's my memory.
Yeah, cricket club, I believe it was around Christmas time,
Okay.
thereabouts,
your memory's a lot
later in the year.
So, well, listen, before we get started there, I want to go back to then. For the few people that don't know you, please can you be kind enough just to introduce yourself and, who you are, a little bit about you.
Sure. My name's Elton Apps. The Apps surname is kind of unusual. I'm 1/16th Irish, originally born in Malta, grew up in Singapore. For my sins, I've been in the financial industry pretty much for the last 18 years. First as a headhunter, and then later on moving in-house, in the in-house teams for recruitment. Eventually heading up some of those teams, heading up HR departments, and now I've come full circle. I run my own search firm. I am a licensed financial consultant. So I think it's been really 18 years about just, working with people, helping people.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, listen, you've had an amazing career journey. So let's rewind. So we first met cricket club because my wife's dad was your boss.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And
Yeah.
I'd heard a lot about you because he always talked about you glowingly. And obviously we're Eurasian. So he said, look, this guy he'd be your Eurasian brother. You'd get along very well with him. So I'd heard a lot about you. And then we met that day and we ended up having a good old natter. And then I didn't see you again for quite some time, I don't think.
Well, then it was probably, I think, maybe a year.
When Brian died?
Yeah, probably about a year later,
Yeah.
when we then caught up.
What was your memory of our first meeting?
I thought to myself,
Be honest, or maybe don't be honest.
I thought to myself, this was a guy that I could relate to on one hand, but was from a completely different world on the other hand, right? There was so much that was familiar about you because we're close in age.
Yeah.
We both came from Europe, but then there was also so much that was really, really different, right? And I found that quite interesting. I wasn't sure if we would become friends. It was one of those situations where, my boss is there, I'm talking, and I'm trying to understand the dynamics between everything. And you seemed like a fun enough guy, but I wasn't exactly sure.
Yeah. And listen, I was still, just dating Tara. So I was still having to, tread carefully with Uncle Brian. So, not thinking about that. And then what a lot of people don't know about you is that you actually spent part of your childhood growing up in Indonesia.
Yes, that's right. So I came from a family that moved wherever the oil rigs moved.
So you were born in Malta, right?
I was born in Malta. I spent maybe 3 to 6 months as a baby there. And then after that, collectively between the age of 0 to 16, I had only spent maybe 2 years in Malta.
Wow.
Yeah. And we were traveling. We were, I lived in Jakarta for 3 years. I lived in Balikpapan for a year.
What was that like?
The funny thing is, it's the strangest things you kind of remember.
How old were you? Like 8?
Yeah, I was probably from the age of 6 to 9.
Okay.
There, and it's expat schools, right? Now I realize, okay, that house was massive, right? And I realize, okay, my father was on expat terms that you don't get anymore.
Yeah.
We had a driver, But now I also realized that the driver was there for my safety.
Yeah.
Because it was actually back in the days when you couldn't take the bus to school.
Yeah.
All right. There's no way you could take the bus to school because one of those days you're not going to make it back.
Wow.
Right.
Scary.
And when we moved to Balikpapan, which was after Jakarta, there are two things I remember. One, there was only one road from the airport all the way to the compound which we lived in. And two, the day I turned on the faucet in the bathroom, very first night there, it came out as brown sludge.
Really?
Right.
Your abiding memory is clear, right? You remember
That's what I remember, right? Those are the two things. Obviously,
having chocolate milk for dinner later that night.
That was for the bath. I was going to run a bath for myself, and I just looked at it horrified, and it continued for a good, I would say a good full minute.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then, but what did your dad do at the time in oil and gas?
So he worked on an oil rig. He was what they would call a materials man, right? So he was basically in charge of all the parts and, bits and bobs that they have on the rig, making sure everything's functioning well and so forth.
Yeah. Have you ever been back since?
What, to Jakarta?
No, Balikpapan.
To Balikpapan? No.
I bet you wouldn't even recognize the place now.
For sure. No, I mean, that was a lifetime ago.
Yeah. And then how old when you came to Singapore?
I came to Singapore. First time I came to Singapore, I was 10.
Okay.
Shortly after Jakarta. And I've pretty much been here ever since. The family's traveled. I changed schools a few times because even though I was here,
I didn't realize that. Okay.
At certain periods of time, the family still moved. Like we moved from the east of Singapore to the west of Singapore, and then my family actually moved from the west of Singapore overseas and left me here.
Yeah. So you were in boarding school at St. Pat's, right?
Yes. So I was in St. Patrick's boarding school. Very, very interesting.
How long were you in the?
I was there for 2 years.
Okay.
Though looking back, I wish I was there longer. Right?
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because
I didn't think you liked it that much.
The funny thing is, the first 3 months I was miserable. Right? I was a daddy's boy. I missed my family. I didn't like the rules. Lights out at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Of course.
And then I made friends. And then I understood the system and how to get around the rules. And then it was lovely.
No problems.
No problems. And I, and when I had to move out of boarding school because my parents had managed to move back to Singapore.
How old were you then?
That was secondary 3, so I was 15.
Okay.
I actually was quite upset about it in a way.
Yeah.
In hindsight, if I talk about secondary school, a large part of it was those first 2 years in the boarding school. That's when all the fun and the mischief came about.
I bet. What's interesting is when you look at your journey, one of the things that you taught me, and I've never learned to do it, you can tell typically what school somebody went to by the way they talk and their mannerisms.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is very unusual. Like
That's right.
you clock it, all the time.
Yes. I mean, it's funny, and I kind of treat it like a game.
Yeah.
Right? So when you meet someone, based on a few of the things they say, based on where they live, based on, the memories they recollect, you can usually tell, right? Is this person a SJI boy, ACS boy, RI, is the girl from Katong Convent or CHIJ Topayo? They're subtly different.
Yeah.
Right?
Amazing.
But I can get it right 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah, I won't even begin to guess. So what happened after that? So you finished at St. Pat's?
Finished in St. Pat's, went to Catholic Junior College.
Okay. Which
was, again, a sort of east-west move because St. Pat's is on the east. All my friends went to Tampines Junior College, Temasek Junior College, places like that. And my parents had moved back, and we had moved back into our house that we had at Holland Village. So moved to Catholic Junior College, knew maybe like 3 people from secondary school, had to restart. And then after junior college, most of my friends went to the army. I was still on a student pass.
Yeah.
So I went straight into university, and I had half the network that other people had, right? Because a lot of my friends had gone. So I had to make new friends, and that was another restart. So, my life's kind of been about adapting, restarting.
Can't have been easy though, right? Because you're friends with people and they all go off, you're not part of that journey?
It's very difficult, right? And you kind of wonder what if, right? Like my best friend in secondary school, we did everything together.
Yeah.
Played football together. We were on the tennis team together. I've not physically met him in 10 years.
Really?
Right?
We're still in touch, but
We're still in touch. Nothing wrong.
Yeah.
But you just grow apart because he went to NS. He had his NS stories. He had his friends there. He went to Temasek Junior College. You know, I went to a different college. I had to make new friends. My new friends were from a different crowd.
Yeah.
You know, and you just end up growing apart.
And how did you choose and decide to do political science at uni? Was it by design or?
Well, I did political science and psychology.
Okay, sorry.
Right? And what had happened was
They didn't teach you much because you come to work with me. So, you know,
I was initially wanting to go and do law. All right.
but yeah.
But I wanted to do law overseas because my abiding memory at the time was that law in Singapore, having done a couple holiday jobs in law firms, wasn't really for me.
You wanted to go to London, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think about 3 months before I was meant to head out, you know, I have a conversation with my father and he says, look, these things are happening. You know, we need to make a wise decision, and that wise decision would be to keep you in Singapore. So, truth be told, I then picked the faculty that had the most girls.
Is that how?
That was the decision.
Listen, I love that decision-making process, by the way.
I was like, well, if I have to stay here, I'm going to have fun staying here. And I picked the faculty that had most ladies.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to pick subjects which I could afford to not really study for, because what's the point about having a great environment and surrounding and not having the time to have fun in that environment and surrounding?
Very true, very true.
All right. So I still remember my first 2 semesters, I had 9 hours a week, and it was Tuesday to Thursday.
Yeah.
Friday to Monday, it was party time. Right? And you know, and it's interesting because there's, you know, politics and psychology plays a lot into even something as simple as that, right? Who are the popular kids in class?
Yeah.
Who should you get the notes from? Who should you copy from? That kind of thing, you know?
And then when you finished uni, what happened? Because I don't recall. How did you make the transition? What was your first job?
So I finished uni and I came out of university and I was like, well, I didn't get the degree that I wanted to get, right? I'd watched a lot of TV shows. I wanted to be a hotshot lawyer. I didn't get that degree, and so I didn't really know what I wanted to do with myself. And you know, and 4 years of studying 9 hours a week didn't ingrain in me a passion for anything in particular. So my dad said, well, you know, you're a man now. Come and work with me. If you can't decide what you want to do, work with me until you do. And so I went into the oil and gas business as a project manager. That was my first job. And I very quickly realized that I still did not know what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But
did
I
you find out
what I did not want to do.
Well, listen, that's just as important. But how was it working with your dad? Because that's never easy typically, right?
Well, it's very unusual, right? Because you still get to do things like sleep in the car on the way to work.
Yeah, true.
Because he's driving you into work. So you're still a kid in a way.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you know, he's got to treat you the same as everyone else. You've got to pull your weight. So what he had done was he had put me in a different department, right? Which worked out fine, you know. But as I said, very quickly, within about 2 years, I realized that really wasn't for me.
But you did it for 2 years?
Yeah, I did it for 2 years. Yeah.
I never read your CV, obviously, back in the day, right?
I mean, I've never really quit anything.
Yeah.
Right? So after that, I mean, I still hadn't really quit, but I had decided that wasn't for me, and I started looking around, you know. And the funniest thing happened because my next job is where we ended up connecting.
Yeah.
Right? And my next job there, I had met with your father-in-law, and I had met him on the pretext of interviewing for a marketing role for a company that he did not work for or own.
Really? And Yvonne connected you guys?
Yeah. So Yvonne said, you know, I've got you an interview. It's for...
How did she... Yvonne, by the way, is your best friend.
Yeah.
How did she know Brian, Uncle Brian?
Oh, I'm not sure. Yeah, I would have to go and check.
Isn't that weird? I don't know either.
I can't remember for certain.
Yeah. So you went for this gig, for this marketing gig?
So I went for this marketing role, and I was expecting to meet a Chinese gentleman. And instead I met a larger-than-life Eurasian guy who basically said, well, yeah, I know you were going to meet Mr. Ong, but he's not available, talk to me instead. What do you do?
Really?
Right.
I didn't know that.
And I said, okay, this is who I am. This is what I do. And he went, his eyes lit up. Wait, you're Eurasian?
Yes.
You're from St. Patrick's?
Yeah.
I'm from St. Patrick's. Okay, you're coming to work for me.
And was he the president of the Eurasian Association at the time?
Yes, he was.
Okay.
Right. So he said, you're coming to work for me.
Yeah.
We'll put your project management skills to work in my shipping company.
Yeah.
And you'll write my speeches and you will follow me around for all my engagements and just see what you pick up along the way.
And did he say like what percentage split was going to be the commercial side of things, the shipping business versus the Eurasian?
It was meant to be 50-50.
But in reality, the Eurasian Association?
In reality, I think, in reality, I still don't know anything about shipping.
Let's be honest, you were sending SMSs to all his girlfriends probably.
I had done that as well. Because, Brian was larger than life and he would look at stuff and he'd go, all right. We need to prepare for this meeting. Can you respond to her? Just tell her yes, no, I'm busy. So I did everything from doing that to, the scoping out what a stage would look like as if he was going to go do a speech, to just reading all his emails and sort of telling him, okay, you've got 58 emails in the last hour.
Yeah.
These are the 15 that you need to pay attention to, and we'll ignore the rest.
I'm just curious because you've worked for some bigger than life personalities, but he's got to be right up there. I mean, what was he like to work with you? Because on a personal social level, I've not really met many people like that at all. He was one of one. His personality was bigger than he was, and he was a big man.
The funny thing is, he was the same person.
Yeah,
right? In my opinion, he was the same person. Maybe I was a little bit privileged.
Yeah.
Because he never really treated me like an employee.
Yeah.
He always treated me like someone he was training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I got to see all sorts of things, right? I was brought to his house very early on. I got to see how he reacted to things behind the scenes, right? And he kind of just didn't really set those boundaries, right? He was very good in that he never disturbed me on weekends. I wasn't on call 16 hours a day or anything.
Yeah.
But, the 12 hours a day for the 5 days a week, it was really no holds barred, right?
Yeah.
Whatever he needed done, he'd either get me to vet, or, get my opinion on it, right?
But he would ask your opinion, right?
Yeah, and I think that was part of his way of training, right?
Yeah.
To help me form a decision on something, right? And he'd be on a conference call on back then they didn't really have a lot of conference calls. It was speakerphone, right?
Yeah.
He'd be on speakerphone and then he'd mute it and he'd like, this guy's talking nonsense. What do you think? All right. And then I would have to give him my 2 cents on it. And
it's funny. So when I first started dating Tara, he called me up one Friday evening and he said, Paul, where are you? I said, I'm just having some drinks with the guys. And he said, Tara was away in Hong Kong with her friends or on business or something. He said, do you want to go out for some drinks later? I said, yeah, sure. So next thing, it wasn't to a bar. He took me, you'll know this, he took me to maybe 3 or 4 of his friends' house. And he was like showing me off and introducing me to everyone, and which was lovely. And then we got to the end of the evening and I was very drunk. He had a driver and we were on the way back and he said, why don't we pick up a bag and you spend the weekend with me? I'll cook you breakfast in the morning. Which is it's such an unusual kind of invite, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he said to me, as we were walking in the front door, he put his arm over my shoulder. He said, you know what, Paul, you are the son I never had, but I always wanted. And I just thought, I was blown away by that because it was so unique, it was so different. And I've learned a lot. So now when it comes to my daughter's future boyfriends, I'm going to try and remember that, as opposed to greeting him at the front door with a chainsaw and a machete. Do you know what I mean?
As much as you would be tempted.
Yeah, I might be tempted. My son, he's probably there to do that. So let's roll on. Let me tell you what my memory was. So Brian passed away. Everything changed. And I remember when I first met you, I came into the office. I was wearing a suit. Tara was still very young. And you were kind enough. You basically resigned because you said, look, there's no job for me anymore, right? And you knew we were going to go through a hard time. and that was it. And I felt really bad because he spoke so highly of you. Of all the people that he worked with him, you were the one. And then I remember you leaving the office, and I just felt bad. I just thought, this poor guy's lost his job just like that overnight, right? What was your memory? Similar?
It was similar. I'd love to say that was the first time I did a pull away on you.
Yeah.
But no, it was similar. It was very shocking to have, a character like that just pass away so suddenly.
Yeah.
And then to realize, now I realize the amount of concentration risk in that business around him.
Yeah.
Without him, there wasn't a business.
Yeah.
And he had at that time, looking back, he had been trying to diversify that risk by actually training me, so that I could hopefully take on some of it. I think that was his plan.
Yeah.
That was his plan. So it was very disheartening, and I was, kind of thrown for a loop, because I had gone from a young man who had no idea what he wanted to do, right, as a career, to someone who was starting to feel like, okay, maybe I'll get involved in all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And then it was gone again.
Well, think about it. The oil and gas and shipping business were quite closely aligned, and you could have easily ended up running that shipping business.
I think so. I think if it had been a little bit more documented and structured, if there was something to take over.
Yeah.
Right. But he had kept everything in his head.
Everything.
So every invoice,
nothing.
Yeah. Every invoice, every piece of business was stored there. And without him around, nobody knew what to do next.
So fast forward, you then got a gig with the Eurasian Association, did you? Is that what happened, or with your dad?
So fast forward, you're right. I had a really short stint at the Eurasian Association.
New president, was it?
There's a new president who had been a very close business associate of Brian's. And so they said, hey, why don't you come on board? We need a sort of like an assistant general manager. They initially had said we need a general manager. Then they had realized, well, okay, he's still a kid. He's not even 30. Let's try him out for a bit. So I went there and I, did a bunch of office administration, and I did put in some policies, did some projects, started to understand it. That was about 3 months, I think.
Yeah.
And then I got a call.
Let me tell you. So what led to that was, I remember exactly where I was. I had quit my job, wanted to go and set up. I was now running Brian's business with Tara. Just set up my own recruitment company, and I was being sued. But I had a piece of work, as you know, and I thought I need someone to help me do parts of it. And I just immediately thought of you. And I was at Raffles Place, and I called Tara. We weren't married yet, and I just said, I think I'm going to hire Elton. If he comes to work with me, would you mind? He has to say yes, yeah. And she goes, have you spoken to him? I said, no, but he'll come and work with me. I think he'll be okay with that. I didn't know what you were doing. I felt very strongly about it. And she didn't want me to hire you. She just felt that you were part of the family. I said, no, it's, if anything, that's the reason why we should work together. And we had literally only spoken really that time at the cricket club for maybe an hour over a few drinks. And I think 10 minutes in the office, and then at Brian's funeral. So it's not like we'd gone out and had dinner together. Yeah. Anything, right? And so I called you. So what's your memory of that?
Yeah, I don't remember where I was when I received the call, but I do remember the call. And I think, it's not like I had options lined up, right? And it was very clear to me very quickly that, a gig like at the Eurasian Association was not something that was going to be exciting enough for me, right? All respect to them. I think a lot of people could work there for many, many years, but for me, I wanted something different. So when you called me, I remember it wasn't a particularly long call. I agreed quite quickly to meet with you. And it's a good thing I did as well, because while the call was short, the meetings to discuss joining you were extremely long and extremely intense.
Was that from me or from Kush?
A little bit of both.
Was it?
A little bit of both, right?
Okay. First ever employee in the company, right? We wanted to get it right.
Yeah. So that was, And it was a real whirlwind, right? After that, from the point of that call,
Yeah.
I would say the next 12 months is like one of those TV montages. It's just the reel's just spinning faster than a person could normally perceive.
Yeah, I remember calling you when we got married. I wanted you to come to the wedding in Bali. You couldn't come. And I remember calling you and I was extremely drunk. It was like 7 o'clock in the morning. So I was drunk from the wedding night. And I said, has that check come through in the post? And I think you said, Paul, it's Sunday. I can't remember what day it was, the weekend.
Yeah.
And I was stressing out. And I was stressing out because people like Jason, Sandri and Novid were buying rounds of shooters. And I didn't realize that the villa was providing them because I bought all the bottles. They set up their own bar at the Astana. I worked out it was $3.50 plus US dollars back then. And they, for example, brought me a round of 6 shots. And they were all doing 6 shots. And I was doing the maths thinking, flipping hell, we need to put a stop to this and cauterize it. Going from doing what you did into recruitment and sales, you probably never thought, you didn't even think about recruitment ever before, I would imagine, right?
I didn't know it existed as an industry.
Yeah.
Right. Firstly. So there's no way I could have thought about it. And I didn't understand a lot of the basic concepts that I understand now. Right. Like, to me, it was like, if you want a job, ask around, send your resume out. I did not realize that there were skill sets and people who were, valuable enough to attract into a company that you would go out there and effectively get how I thought of it was get a private investigator to go into the world and find the person with this skill set.
Yeah.
So that was all entirely new to me. It was very fascinating, but it was also really hard work. Right?
You tell the audience a little bit about having me working with you so intensely.
Well, and the intensity was at a different level, right?
Yeah.
You had started covering the private banking desk.
Yeah.
Kush covered technology. I knew nothing about either desks back in that period of time.
Yeah.
And it was a small company, and we had 3 seats lined up like this next to one another. And I was sat in the middle.
Were you? I can't remember.
I was sat in the middle, number one. And number two, I had, we had these headsets that had a adapter so you could listen in.
Yeah.
Right?
Electronics, they cost me a fortune, by the way, and you must have hated those headsets.
And my first 1,000 sales calls in an area I did not know anything about were, all right, did you memorize the script? Okay, go. You're going to say the following things to someone who earns 25 times more than you, is 20 years older than you, but you're going to convince them to come in to meet you to talk about their career. And I just found that really, really bizarre.
Yeah.
When you'd be on the other line and I'd be going through it and you'd be making faces, you'd be covering them out.
You could press mute and I would tell you what to say. And
exactly. And you'd be like, all right, say this. All right, that's really, really good. No, don't take no for an answer. Ask him again. Right? And and it was really quite stressful because I've always been an introvert.
Yeah.
Right? If I'm given the choice between, sitting in my room on the computer or reading a book over going to meet a dozen people, the natural instinct would always be to sit in my room.
Me too.
Right? It is the meeting a dozen people that I do not know was back at that time a terrifying prospect.
Yeah.
And then I ended up having to call 50 of these people day in and day out.
So give the numbers, right? Because you still hold the company records for quite a few of the KPIs, but I would say to you, you need to get 10 bankers. You need to arrange 10 candidate interviews between me and private bankers each day, every day. And you got 9. You were consistently hitting big numbers, but it was like...
I think I consistently managed to get about, 4 to 6.
Yeah.
That was very, very consistent.
Yeah.
Which, looking back, that's 20 to 25 bankers who are taking an hour out of their day.
Yeah.
And if you use very rudimentary math and said, well, an hour of their day is worth $1,000.
Yeah.
I was pulling, $20,000 worth of meetings in.
Yeah.
All right. And I hit 9. I never hit 10. And the funny thing about it was part of the reason why I never hit 10, now looking back at it, was I always wanted whoever I brought in to actually be decent, right?
You were focused on the quality.
It couldn't be bring in 10 and have 4 of them be really, really bad at what they do. I wanted it to be, 9 people, because I was young, right? Approval actually meant something to me, right? I wanted yourself and Kush to turn around and say, hey, that's a really good candidate. We can do something with this, right? So I think the record is 9, but we're looking at 40 to 50 calls a day. And, if you're bringing in 9 and you're calling 40 people, that means you've got 31 who have told you no.
Yeah.
And some of them were not very nice.
Yeah.
Right? Some of them were not very nice. They held high positions, MDs, heads of branches, and they would, I would go in my mind, completely professional, very, very polite.
Yeah.
Right? And they would literally tell me to jump off a cliff, right?
Yeah.
You'd get, phrases like, do you know who I am? No, I'm not interested. Never call me again. Right?
Yeah.
And just slam down the phone.
Yeah. Terrible.
Right? And, look, good luck to them. But one thing I've learned, over my time in sales and in the business is you just never know.
You never know.
You just never know who's on the other side of that phone.
Yeah.
And one of the very difficult meetings, and I remember this now, one of the very difficult meetings was someone I had pulled in, and if I'm not wrong, it was 2006, very, very early on. I had pulled them into the office that we had at Change Alley.
Yeah.
All right. And they were easy enough to get on the phone to, but when they had arrived, they were not very pleasant at all. They were very, very difficult individual, right, to deal with. And, they tossed the name card across the table. Every question,
people are terrible, aren't they?
every question I asked was a monotonous yes, no. He was literally, so what do you got for me?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about it is, fast forward from 2006 to 2016, I had by that time, in 2016, I ended up hiring him for the organization I worked for.
I remember who he is now. Yeah.
Arranging his retirement package.
Yeah.
Because he was pushing in on 60.
Yeah. I remember. You looked after him.
I looked after him. He didn't remember that first meeting.
Did you remind him?
I reminded him.
I hope he took you out for dinner at the very least.
Right. And fast forward again, another 8 years in, 2024, we're still in touch.
Yeah.
We're still friends.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
So you just never know. I think, moral behind that is just always try to be nice to people.
Can't have been easy working for someone like me because I didn't tolerate any shit from anyone.
Well, that's the thing, right? What you taught me very well is you can still be nice to someone and not tolerate their nonsense.
Yeah.
Right? And, it's not a skill that I've mastered by any means, and it's not something that I've had the confidence to apply till perhaps the last 10 years or so. Right? And the funny thing is, doing things that way will very quickly show you who you want to talk to again and again and again, and who you're willing to write off.
Interesting.
Because some of the best relationships are born out of confrontation.
Yeah. Very true.
Right?
Very true.
Some of the best relationships are born out of people realizing that, hold on, I treated you poorly, you treated me well.
Yeah.
Let me come back and revisit this.
That's a very good,
right?
Very good point.
And for other people, they'll hold it against you. Right?
Yeah.
They were rude to you, you stand your ground. They don't like that.
Yeah.
They don't like that because either you called them out for being rude, or you refuse to let them bully you.
Yeah.
And then they go by the wayside, and that's fine, right? Good riddance.
Yeah. One of the things I always admired about you, and I don't know, actually, before I tell you that, people that you met latterly since you've gone in-house, do you think they perceive you as an introvert? Because I'm guessing they may not.
In-house or outside?
Well, both.
Both.
So in your corporate job, when you were in-house, and then your friends know what you're like. But
right. I think senior people who ran in different circles realized I was an introvert, mostly because I was not in their circles. Right? but anyone who worked closely with me would have been shocked that I was an introvert.
Yeah.
Because, the one thing a lot of people who've worked with me has always told me was, oh yeah, we need an impromptu speaker, talk to 200 professionals off the cuff. All right, get Elton to do it. He'll be fine.
Yeah.
We need someone to present to a room full of people who are more senior than him. Yeah, get Elton to do it. He'll be fine.
Yeah.
Right? And it was sort of this dynamic that made people think, he's got to be an extrovert, right?
Yeah.
He's not shy. He's not nervous. I just hit it well.
Yeah.
All right? The reality is, I'm as introverted as they come.
Well, one of the things I really admired about you was you just said to me, look, Paul, I'm not a salesperson to begin with because I'm an introvert. And I remember having this conversation many times when we first started working together. And I always said to you, look, in fact, the majority of the people that you speak to, when you get past that initial conversation, once you've established that credibility, because you're so genuine and honest, you will 100% connect with them. And in particular, if they're introverts. And you were so sweet. You know, if you were being put under a lot of pressure, you actually used to turn red. And after a while, you just learned to handle it better and better. But you never gave up. You hung in there. And our job is a notoriously difficult job. And I admire, it's like this. I was a boxer. I admire anyone that has the confidence and courage to get through the ropes. And someone asked me today, they said, well, how are you still in all these years later? And I said, maybe it's because of my background in martial arts and boxing. I've got thick skin. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the lessons you learned, because I'm just curious on the sales side, because I was asked by my guys today in preparation for today's chat, what are some of the things that Elton did well? And I said, lots of things. So first and foremost, I mean, I put myself in this category, but you're the best note taker, right? Very comprehensive notes, detailed notes, because I find a lot of people, when they take notes, they write what they know, but they never write what they don't know or questions. Your memory was, you could go back and tell me when something was written, you would remember the compensation, you remembered everything. And then, do you remember when there was a time when I started doing some psychometric tests internally for new hires?
Yeah.
And you did a bunch of tests beyond the psychometric tests, and you aced them. You aced all of them. But what's your memory about the sales training and how that helped you in the next chapter or two of your career?
Well, I think what happened was, for training for me, it was always about trying to train up my weaknesses, right? I was a little bit reluctant to pick up the phone to call people. I was a little bit reluctant to put myself out there for rejections, right? But what I knew I was decent at was, spotting information that would be important and connecting with people if I was given the chance, right? It's always a case of, if you'll talk to me for 5 minutes, you'll probably talk to me for 2 hours,
That's a very good point.
And so I think the first thing I learned was 3 no's is a no, right? So people will tell you no many, many times. You go back, you try again and try again. Might be a bad day, they might be busy, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you'll be very surprised that you get 2 no's, and the third time around, they go, all right, fine, you're persistent, I'll meet you.
Yeah.
I've literally had managing directors, managing 100 people, give up and go, you're persistent, I'll meet you.
Yeah.
Right? And I think part of it is they work in organizations where nobody dares to do that.
Yeah.
Right?
They got to respect it, right?
You're right. So that was one of the first things I learned.
By the way, like, if someone has ever said that to me, I said, don't bloody meet me because I'm persistent. Meet me because I'm good and I add value. But anyway, that's just me.
Well, I mean, look, that I just never was that person.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
that's why I think we always collaborated so well, because we're chalk and cheese in many ways. We have a lot of similar values, but
yeah. And 20 years in, look, the memory is gone now, right? I can remember meetings I've had 15 years ago, but I can't remember people I've met 15 days ago, right? And I don't know how it's hardwired and how it works.
Funny, right?
But that has now made the note-taking that much more important. And what I always told myself when I was taking notes was, what are they saying? What do I want to say next?
Yes.
Right? And, what are they not saying that I should be curious about?
Yeah.
Right? And every time I asked myself those 3 things, I would end up sort of almost creating an interview form based on the notes and then redeveloping it, version 2.0, version 3, version 4, because I was sort of refining the art of, getting that information, parsing that information, and I would highlight little things that someone said that nobody else has said.
Yeah.
And then I would then find a way to reincorporate that into my sales pitch.
Yeah.
Right. Because I still maintain I'm not a natural salesperson.
Yeah.
Right. But yet, despite that, if you speak to, a dozen headhunters, there's a very, very strong chance that I would get through to the individual because I just said something that does not come out of the mouth of a headhunter.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And they're impressed because they've never heard it before.
Yeah.
And they haven't quite pieced together yet that it actually came out of someone who's got a lot more experience than me, who said something enlightening.
Yeah.
And I actually bothered to co-opt it, right?
You build it in. Well, also your attention to detail, without mentioning names, but we placed a ridiculously big banker who did $5 million on day one. But I remember during the qualification, the head of HR at the time said, look, this guy is doing $10 million revenue a year. And you went back and said, no, I think that's, and we looked and we talked to him and said, that's year to date. He's doing like $25 million a year,
Yeah.
And just by that one qualification, you're not like, what's your revenue? When is it? Is it year to date? How does it work? What are some of the other key things that you learned in terms of sales? Because I'm curious, because I think in any job that you do, sales is part of what you have to do. It doesn't matter if you're a school teacher and you're selling ideas to the principal, but what other takeaways did you get from the recruitment business?
From the recruitment business specifically, I would say, firstly, sales usually is a target-oriented task. You have something in mind, right? And I think the most important thing in order to get a good sales done is to actually forget about that task.
Yeah.
You're not there to place someone. You're not there to hire someone for a client. You're there to have a conversation with an individual to see if they're the right individual and to see if that's going to change their lives.
Yeah.
And that's a lot more immense than, what's your salary?
Absolutely.
What's your experience? You need to have an interest in them.
Yeah.
What do they do? What are they like? What's their routine when they get home?
Yeah.
Right?
I love it.
Is this someone that takes out their keys and puts it in the same spot every day?
Yeah.
Well, this person might be good for a very structured role.
Yeah.
With routine, right?
Yeah.
Is it someone who has 4 kids and works really, really hard, but from the hours of 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. every morning, you don't disturb him?
Yeah.
Right? Well, this person might not work very well in a very large structured organization,
Yeah.
but they'd love a boutique, right? So, you get to know people that way, and then you try to understand, what their potential is for the role, and then the sale will close itself.
I don't even remember this. I'm going to give you some memories, but I invited you for lunch in Chinatown, and we hadn't been working together long. It was less than a year. And I said to you, I love you, man. I want to work with you for the rest of our careers. And I think you thought I might have been gay or something because I said, do you remember that conversation?
I remember that conversation. I believe you put your arm around me when you said it. And I remember I was sweating.
Because of me doing that? Or?
No, because we were in Chinatown and we were sat on the outside.
That's right.
Of a restaurant.
That's right.
And I was perspiring. And that's my abiding memory. And all I could think of was, he's going to get a whiff right now.
Well, the other funny thing is we used to do Friday wind-up gags, and we had a lot of fun. And tell them about the time where we went to KL. We had to do a search to hire a Malaysian team.
Oh, wow.
In Malaysia, and we drove in my Alfa Romeo GT at the time to KL.
Yes.
Tell them about that first dinner, because that was hilarious.
So we drove over to KL. We were extremely tired by the end of the drive because it wasn't just sort of drive and keep quiet. It was driving. We were talking about the search. We were talking about candidates.
Yeah.
I was giving you the brief on who you were meeting the next day.
Yeah.
And even then we were still trying to arrange for more meetings.
Yeah.
Right. Because unlike in a big corporation, you'll take a business trip to cover one meeting.
Yeah.
Right. But we were a small outfit and we wanted to get as much mileage as we could.
Yeah.
From the trip. So we arrived, and I believe it was the Shangri-La.
It was.
And it was a relatively worn down Shangri-La, as Shangri-Las actually tend to be these days, right?
Yeah.
They don't get renovated a whole lot often, so they've got this sort of 80s feel to it. And we were looking around, and it was actually very crowded. There were kids running around. I don't know what the occasion was, but for some reason, it was really crowded. And one of the only restaurants that we could get a booking for was a quiet French restaurant.
Yeah.
Right. And I wasn't particular about what we were going to eat.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, we went there, and it was table for two. The maitre d' gave us a little bit of a strange look. What are you two blokes doing here? This is very, very much before wokeness and all that.
Yeah.
And I just shrugged it off. I was tired. I was hungry.
Yeah.
We sat down. We had a very simple meal.
We had burgers.
We had, I think you had a burger and I had a steak.
Okay.
And we had one side of fries, which we split.
Yeah.
Right? And I think you had a glass of wine. And I had a Coke.
Okay. Good memory. Very good memory.
And at the end of that, dinner, we asked for the bill. And the bill arrives, and you look at the waiter and you go, "Oh, I think this is wrong." And the waiter looks at the bill and goes, "Yes, sorry." And he walks away, comes back a minute later. "I forgot to add the wine." And that was totally not what you had in mind.
Yeah.
Right? I think you were appalled by the price.
It was, Don, what do you remember the price being?
I think it was like 2,000 ringgit.
Yeah, it was about 1,000 Singapore dollars.
Right?
I remember thinking at the time, what the hell?
Right, for a steak, a burger, a side of fries, a Coke, and a wine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, and then you never let me forget it. You were like, "This better close, right? This better be worth it."
Oh dear, that is hilarious. Do you have any questions or things you want to talk about that before we move on to the next part of your career?
No. I mean, I'll go wherever this takes us.
So then, my memory was, I said to you, "Look, mate, my dad had died, and it impacted me very badly. And I thought, I've always wanted to move to America." Tara and I talked about what that journey would look like, and she got accepted into Yale. We didn't know that at the time, but I said, "Look, realistically, if I can work it out, we're going to move to the US a year from now," which was quite unusual. And I said to you, "Look, we've got several options. Option one, you take over NISIS, right? Option two, you stay on as a senior consultant. I'll just pay you more and increase your commissions. Option three, we go into a business together, 50-50. I'll bankroll it for the first 2.5 years. And then after that, hopefully we're doing well and you put some money in. And the last option, which I don't really want to talk about, is you leave the firm." And unfortunately, at the end, after lots of discussions, we sat down, we had an 8-hour discussion or something close to that. And I don't think it was your intention, but you resigned. And I just said to you, this is my memory, "Listen, do what you got to do, no problem, but the door's open. I don't want you to leave." And then that was my memory of it.
Yeah. My memory of it was a little bit different.
Okay.
Right? I mean, we were all going through our own things at that point in time. And, my waistline was 10 centimeters smaller. I was 15 kilos lighter. But I was also, 15 years more naive, right, of everything. And at that time, that was the year that I was getting married. And I was buying my first property, right? And for me, it was a case of, how am I going to run this on my own while still working with you? Because you're all hands on deck, 24/7. In my mind, that's how I felt, right? And I was like, he's going to be 12 hours away.
Yeah.
Right? There goes Saturday. There goes Sunday. And,
Is that what you thought?
That was part of it. And the second part of it was also, I had been doing it long enough to know that, I still do it today. So it's obviously not a job that I can't do or won't do.
Yeah.
But I had been doing it long enough to know at that point in time that I was interested in seeing what else there was, right? What else was out there? So in the end, I resigned without a job. And then I
don't know who was more gutted. I was gutted. I came back, I was devastated because I really had trained you, because I just thought we would work together forever in my own little mind. And I just knew you were capable of, I always believed in you. I thought you were so capable that you could take on so much more.
Oh, no, definitely. And I think I was gutted because I had just quit a job that I had enjoyed without another job to go to. So I had nothing to look forward to.
Yeah.
But I had somehow put it in my head that doing this would have been too difficult, right?
Interesting.
Staying on to do it in the setup that we had would have been too tough.
Yeah.
And, and I was thinking about, how am I going to pay the mortgage and the down payment and wedding costs? And, I had a lot of bills coming in.
Yeah.
And I just thought to myself, well, if I missed billing for a quarter or two, I'm done, right? I would be really, really,
and not that long before we had the global financial crisis. So we knew that hard times could really impact us because it led to Kush, my ex-business partner, leaving. I always felt, by the way, sorry to interrupt you, that it's not like Kush that didn't see your talent, but he didn't. I don't think he really saw your talent. And I pride myself on, believing in people. The thing is, you screwed up the whole process, because after hiring you, I thought I can bring lots of people in the business and they're all going to be like Elton. and that was not the case. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah.
But okay, so then where did your thought process begin? Because now you're thinking, what do I do next?
Yeah, so it was, what do I do next, right? And I very quickly realized if I was going to leave NISIS at the time, then it wouldn't be to join another search firm, right? Really, because, I was leaving the nature of the work to look for something that was different.
Yeah.
But I only knew headhunting at the time. So I then started, looking at jobs in-house. And you very, very quickly, run into what is now an internet meme, right? I'm looking for someone with 10 years experience, right, to do a job, and but nobody's going to give you those 10 years of experience, right? So I spoke with a number of organizations, and finally, the funny thing is, I ended up getting a call. I don't know how the person got my number. I got a call from another headhunter, right? And that also blew my mind, because there were headhunters who were headhunting other recruiters.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation with the gentleman, and he said, look, this is a role that they're looking to fill, and it requires someone who can hunt for talent. They want to save money. The mandate is save the bank money. And I said, okay. And they said, they prefer someone with 2-3 years in-house experience. And I had been a little bit frustrated by that. And I said, oh, well, look, I don't have 2-3 years of experience, but, and I had a BlackBerry at the time, I remember. So take this BlackBerry and record me.
Yeah.
And I said, which is the organization? He told me. And I said, I'm going to draw out the org chart of theirs by memory, tell you who's at risk, who's not at risk.
I love
who's hiring.
I didn't know you did that. I love it.
And you're going to show that together with my resume, right?
Wow.
And that's how I landed my first job as a in-house recruiter at a bank, because the hiring manager, there were 2 hiring managers involved, one in Hong Kong, one in Singapore. And the one in Hong Kong kind of looked at it and said, I'll let the person in Singapore decide.
Yeah.
And the person in Singapore looked at it and said, well, I've landed in Singapore 2 days ago. I need someone who knows the ground. You know the ground. This is perfect, right? And there you go. And that's how I ended up in banking.
The other funny thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, this is my memory. You had, when you were a consultant, you had to develop one particular bank, and you had been asked to go and make a presentation. One of the many times you and I, had disagreements. We always had disagreements, but it was not about who was right as what was right. And I said, look, have you pulled together this presentation? And you got annoyed with me because it was late at night, and I basically thought, you need to pull this presentation together. So this is my memory. And he said, I haven't even done that much work with these guys, right? It's not that important. in terms of the percentage of your revenue that year, I think it was only like 10% or 15%. And I said, yeah, but you just don't know what it's going to lead to. So you pulled together the presentation. We stayed back till about 8:30 that night, and it was on point. You go and make a presentation, and then you come back into the office and say, I've made the most placements or something like that with this organization, and they love the work. And I think that lady was she somewhere in the background of your hire in the bank later on?
No, she wasn't. She wasn't. But the fact that I had worked with them,
okay,
and I could say, hey, I did this work with these people in the bank, actually ended up helping me out during the reference checks. Right?
But it was that she said to you, actually, you've done the most amount of work.
Yeah, I was surprised. She showed me a chart and everything, and she said, look, you're tied for most number of placements.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I thought I was maybe 15th,
Because it was a small percentage of your time and work that year, right?
I mean, yeah.
In reality.
You think of these banks as massive organizations, right?
Yeah.
Surely they must hire hundreds.
Yeah.
Me placing a dozen in a span of 6 months doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
But no, actually, it was tied for most placements, and it was my first year as a consultant. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. So you're now at this private bank. What was the difference and what was the transition like?
So it worked out perfectly because I had gone in from a very, very small organization, right? I was always taught, roll up your sleeves, do everything. It's not about boundaries. This is not my role, your role kind of thing. And, and to push the envelope. So I go in and I'm actually quite mild as an individual, but knowing nothing else, that actually made me a little bit of a renegade within the organization, right? He's the guy who will suggest something that's not part of policy or process because it will save money for the bank, right? And it worked out perfectly because the arm of the organization I was working for was in rebuild mode and they were relatively small.
Yeah.
Right? So...
And the other thing is you now had a lovely boss, unlike before in me, someone that you really, connected with though.
So, and that's the thing, right? That's the key thing. I had a really good boss and it was the right boss at that time.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't think, the same manager would have helped me the way you helped me when I was at NISIS.
Yeah.
Right?
It was different.
It was the right stage of the career to get that kind of manager in place, who was, in this case, someone who thought that I knew what I was doing and said, okay, you run with it.
Yeah.
Just let me know if you run into a problem.
But you did know what you were doing because think about what we were doing, you had to do everything. And if it was new, we did projects. If you look at the projects that we did back then, like feasibility studies, talent management projects, they were unusual.
That's true. But what I've learned is that truly good people are humble about what they know.
I don't know what you're talking about, bro.
And so I thought I didn't know anything, right? Even though I did, right? And
did you really genuinely believe that?
Well, yeah. So I would always, the good thing about that is I would always try my best.
Yeah, true.
Right? And so you deliver work that was better than people who were coasting, who were, hiding in the numbers, right? When you're in an organization, you just don't be the bottom 10%.
Yeah.
Don't be the worst in the department, right? So a good portion of the working population lives by that, right? But I thought that if I didn't do my best, I'd be that bottom 10%, right? I thought that if I didn't prove myself, I would be the worst. And lo and behold, that was not the case at all. So, I had been into my first banking job and I was literally getting a promotion at a rate of 1 every 10 months, right? And
fantastic.
That was a really nice feeling.
Yeah. And then you built out, the bank massively. So you were head of strategic recruitment for Asia, correct?
They had brought me on board to be head of recruiting for the front office for Singapore. And then they gave me front to back for Singapore. And then they gave me front to back for Singapore, Hong Kong.
Right. Okay. So it unfolded progressively.
Yeah.
And what were your key takeaways from that time? Because now you're on the other side of the table. Did you enjoy it? It must have been very different because the environment's very different. It's very, corporate.
I loved it. but we're talking more than a decade ago now.
Yeah.
And one of my key takeaways is actually, sadly, they don't make companies like that anymore, right? They don't make companies where everyone feels like it's a family, people feel close, everybody's name. That doesn't happen anymore, right? Particularly in the financial industry.
Yeah. It's a shame. So you then move on to your next gig, right? Which was, how did you decide to make that decision?
That was the funniest thing, right? So I'm in what I had at that time considered my dream job, only to find out that the organization was going to be sold.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I had thought I might just sit around and take whatever the redundancy package would be, or, try to fight for a position in the new organization, something like that.
Yeah.
And then I got a call from a bank, and the person said, "Hi, is this Elton?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I am with the strategic recruiting team of Bank XYZ. We'd like to chat with you." I said, "Okay, what's this about?" "Well, we heard you're actually, a strong recruiter, and we're starting to expand our team. We don't have anyone out in Asia, all right? And so you get the chance to come in at the ground floor." And I said, okay. And it was a organization I was vaguely familiar with, having, headhunted from them in the past, and had tried to pitch business into them. So I said, okay, sure, no problem. And the funny thing was, this person was so well-spoken, I thought I would be meeting with him. I did not realize later on he would be the most junior person in the team that I was joining.
Wowza.
Right? And he was actually setting up the meeting for me to meet with, the overall global head of strategic recruiting.
Yeah.
So I meet with them, and we have a series of conversations, a series of meetings. And the funny thing about it was my note-taking got me the job.
Yeah.
Right?
By the way, did that gentleman because I met him once through you, and he took a lot of notes.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
I remember
yes.
him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He was yet another kind of manager, and at a very different level, right? Because this for him was a role that was relatively small, and he was taking a risk, right? He was shifting into a position to build out a strategic recruiting team for a business that had no strategic recruiting team.
Yeah.
Right. So I met them, and and it was very luxe. It was very posh. We weren't meeting at a coffee shop. They had booked a private meeting room somewhere, and later on I would come to know that the hourly rate of that meeting room is insane.
Yeah.
And we had a conversation. He was there, and there were a few other interviewers that would come and go, and I was taking notes religiously. And I remember this because the meeting started at 5, and at about 7 o'clock, they then said, "All right, we've got everything we need," because he had flown in to town, so he needed to get it done.
Yeah.
They don't normally interview for 2 hours, but he needed to get it done. And I said, "All right, that's great. Now it's my turn." And I flipped the page of my notebook, and then he realized that I had, I believe it was just around 22 questions for them.
Nice.
Right?
Good man.
And then we went through it, right? And the funny thing is, years later, that's the one thing he remembers about hiring me. He said, of all the people that he had met, I was the only one who asked questions they almost struggled to answer.
Yeah.
And they had not thought of as issues with the business model.
Yeah.
Right? And I was also the only one who took as extensive notes as I had, as though I was absorbing and learning as much as I could.
Yeah.
Because that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah,
if I did not get this job, I wanted to know as much about it as possible.
Yeah.
So that I would be in a better position in future to get another job that was similar. Yeah.
Don't you find though, it's interesting because I remember talking to you about this before, but a lot of people are afraid to take notes because they want to seem like, oh, does that mean I don't know what I'm talking about? And I don't think that makes sense at all, right? Some people have got brilliant memories, they can remember, but I think it goes a long way. So they offered you the job.
Yep.
And then you were off.
And then I'm off. So I spend the first, I remember within the first week, they gave me a massive project to work on, right? Which was really, it was a real eye-opener because you got to see not only how in-house recruiting worked, you got to see how in-house senior decision-making worked, right? And because I didn't mess it up, I then had a really, really good year. And so again, very similar, come in charge of front office for Singapore, and then it starts to evolve.
Yeah.
It later goes, investment advisors for Singapore. The person in Dubai's resigned. Can you take over that? So we do Singapore, Dubai, front office, investment advisors. We have a few strategic C-level searches. Can you look into that? We'll look into that. No problem. That gets added to the portfolio. One day someone comes to me and says, would you like a HR business partner role? I said, what? Exclusively. I said, no, on top of, all right? Because we need you to work with this particular manager who had been shifted out of his role into a new department. And the shift occurred because I had actually helped to hire his replacement. So that was very interesting. The bank needed someone who could navigate that without being offensive to him.
Yeah.
And so they crafted it as an opportunity for me, right? Which it was, right? Don't get me wrong. It's a great opportunity. You get, again, to work with a senior person to understand how decisions are made. So I took that on. That went on for another 2 to 3 years. I sometimes forget I was a HR business partner for that period of time. And then after that, one day they tapped me on the shoulder and they said, would you like to be head of HR for Singapore? I said, okay, on one condition, I'm not giving up strategic recruiting. And they said, why? I said, well, firstly, it's what I know. And secondly, it's the one part of HR where I know there's a quantifiable deliverable that nobody can deny.
Yeah.
Right? So I ended up doing both roles, and and it was lovely. I worked with really great people. I enjoyed, building up the teams. I enjoyed, getting a taste of management.
So now, tell us about what you're doing now and this current iteration of your career, because you've been evolving.
That's right.
You've had the courage to go on to new things, and I can share with you. You know this. Not a lot of people have that courage. But yeah, tell me about what you're doing now and how that came about.
So Elton 3.0 decided that, it was once again time to sort of learn something new, do something different, shake things up a little bit. And so when I had decided to move on from my last job, I interviewed with a number of private banks, various organizations. There were a couple of offers, and nothing quite fit perfectly. Either my wife did not want to move to a country, I did not want to move to a country. It just didn't fit perfectly.
Yeah.
And so 2 of the consultants who had worked with the organization I was at and knew me as a client said, hey, are you going to set up your own firm? All right. And if you are, we'd love to join.
Well, that's pretty amazing.
All right. So, it's pretty amazing because as a lot of service providers will know and will attest to, there are not many clients that they would want to work for.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you get to know them. You get to see them when you're the one who needs something from them.
Yeah.
And how they treat you.
And typically they're not always treated the best, right?
Exactly. So that started my thinking, right? That was the spark that ignited this idea of let's set up a firm. So I roped in another friend of mine because, the more the merrier. And we set up a recruitment firm, a specialist executive search firm that works on private banking. And in parallel to that, I was adjusting some of my own financial planning. And I had to make a very sheepish call to my agent and say, hey, you know what? I'm in the middle of a move. I've not planned this out properly, and I don't have the finances to do all the various policies and plans that I had in mind that I was going to do. And she turned around and said, well, over a decade ago, I tried to hire you. Your skill set's very different. My skill set's very different. Why don't you come on board? Have a chat. And I rubbished it for the longest time. For the longest time, I did not take it seriously. What,
Really?
me, head of HR, become an insurance agent?
Yeah.
Why would I do that?
Yeah.
And that literally was the face that a lot of people have given me ever since I made that move, by the way.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm sure it is.
But she kept rolling out the red carpet. Whilst the private banks were making me go through 8 interviews,
Yeah.
she was calling me up and going, hey, I'm having lunch with the ex-CEO of this insurer.
Yeah.
Or I have a seminar I want to sneak you into, right? And so she was just
And she's brilliant, right? So she's
finding touch points.
Yeah.
So finally I met with her and I said, hey, look, okay, what are you talking about? She said, I think you'd be great at this. We discussed it, and I realized very quickly that, if you're financial planning in Singapore, what are the aspects that you need to be able to cover?
Yeah.
You need to know a little bit about CPF. You need to know a little bit about income tax. You need to know about people's corporate insurance, right? Oh, the company covers it. That's the answer you get a lot from people when you ask them about their insurance. And who knows about all of these things? Well, someone in HR knows about all of these things because we get asked it all the time. So half the knowledge was already
there,
baked in from a decade in large organizations. So I agreed with her and I said, okay, let's do it. So I took the license, so making me one of the very, very few RNF licensed recruiters in the financial industry. So I've got my financial consulting license. I've got my search firm. And I'm sat there thinking, do I want to work 16 hours a day? Because that's 2 different jobs.
Yeah.
And then it occurred to me, well, look, let's bring it in. Let's pull it all together. Let's talk to people about their careers and their financial planning because they're inextricably linked.
Yeah.
All right. So that's what I do these days.
I'm so proud of you and the journey you've gone on, because it's it takes a big person to take a step back, be introspective, and do something new. Because the reality is, you could have gone back in house if you wanted, any way, shape, or form. How do you feel now, basically, effectively working for yourself?
It's a very, very interesting feeling, right? Anxiety levels for certain things go up the roof, whereas certain things I used to be anxious about, I don't even think about at all, right? Working for yourself gives you the freedom to not really get too concerned. You can't fire yourself, right?
Yeah.
You can lose business, but you can't fire yourself. So you're not acting in a way that is about covering yourself.
Yeah.
Right? I don't care if doing what I do gets me fired because nobody can fire me.
Yeah.
Right? I do care that what I do represents myself well.
Yeah.
Because I'm my own brand now. Right?
Well, the other thing with you and I, we worked together long enough to know that we do care about people. You want to do something meaningful and impactful.
Yeah.
That's always been the case with you.
Well, I'll tell you too, that my memory is so bad these days that even though I've closed quite a number of deals and I now have a decent client pool, there are 2 deals which stand out to me the most, right? And of course, without naming names or whatever, one of them was a headhunting case. And it happened right up before I actually got my firm set up, which means I could not charge for it, right? I had a banker come to me and he said, look, I am on X amount of money. Oh, well, we'll just say it. I'm on 1.1 million, right? Because that's what bankers can earn. And I want 1.4. The hiring bank will not pay me. And I put on my HR hat and I told him, you're darn right they're not going to pay you an extra 300,000 because that's the full salary of a director and possibly even an executive director in many organizations. And that gap is not something anyone's going to close for you. But what you could do is you could take that 1.1 million asking price, drop it to 1, and ask them for the remaining 400 in shares. Why? Because as a head of HR, I had signed off on such things before. I knew that the bank, if they loved that banker enough, would pay for those shares.
That you go to bat, yeah.
Organization in question was currently having a really low share price. So I told them, your share price is going to be really low. In 6 months' time, you're going to be laughing because this 400,000 is not going to be 400,000. It's going to be 500, 520.
Yeah.
And guess what? That 520, there's no tax on it.
Yeah.
So guess what? Give me the tax savings and I'm going to set up for you an insurance plan. All right? So that's kind of how I married the 2.
Love it.
Right? And it was the first real deal where I felt I knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't think anybody else in the industry really advises on that basis,
Yeah.
right? So now I've expanded upon that, going through with people, salary bandings, their life cycles. If you're 45 and an MD and you're on this amount, are you going to be up here in 5 years' time?
Yeah.
And if you are, how much of it is going to be in deferred, right? And what does that mean to your wealth accumulation? So I talked to them about that. The other case that stands out in my mind happened earlier this year. I had a really good day. It was January the 6th, right? 6th of January. I didn't rush the White House or anything like that, right? It was just a really good day for me. First of all, I won a prize, right? Largest prize I had won in an organization ever. I won 6,000 euros, right? Lucky
Nice.
draw. Great
Nice.
day. And then I had a bunch of missed calls. And the missed calls were actually from the claims department of an organization to inform me that the claims appeal had gone through for a client. Long story short, the old agent hadn't done all their due diligence and had gotten one of my clients a minuscule claim for a situation that was deemed to be a case of he's lucky to be alive. So imagine that. You buy a insurance policy. Let's say you buy it for $1 million.
Yeah.
And the insurance company tells you, you're lucky to be alive. Here's $20,000. And you're like, wait, where's the rest of my money?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it took me 6 weeks, but I finally, through note-taking, through structured understanding of everything, went through websites, looked at definitions, found the fine print, fought it, and got the full claim.
Wow.
Now, it wasn't $1 million or anything like that. That was an example, but it was the equivalent, right? The claim increased by 20 times.
Well, the principle, the fact that you went out there and you fought for it.
Right. It was about fighting for it. And that day when I had found out the claim came through, that hit me 10 times more than winning those 6,000 euros.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I that no longer registered, So I think, these two deals sort of, encapsulate what I'm finding fun about what I do now.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to worry that, someone senior has different interests, wants to do something different. I get to work with who I want. I get to work with good people.
Yeah.
And I get to treat them well.
It's very empowering, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, a lot of people tell us a few things about you that a lot of people don't know. So, for example, you enjoy weightlifting. Yeah.
I am the weight I lift right now.
Listen, we've all been there, bro. But what are your favorite lifts? Would you say deadlifting, squatting, bench pressing?
Okay, favorite lifts. Trap bar deadlift.
Okay.
Trap bar deadlift.
Did you ever do it on the straight bar?
I did, but because of the various injuries I have, and I've got flat feet and plantar fascia issues, and I've got a bent bone in my shin and all of that sort of thing. Because of those issues, straight bar doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
Long story short, I can't do the Asian squat.
Yeah.
The one where your heels are on the ground and you're fully squatted.
Yeah.
Can't do that. So trap bar deadlift, love to do that. Bench, is vanity exercise, but I love to do that because I've got, relatively short arms. That makes it a lot easier. Leg press back in the day was one of my favorites as well. But I mean, I've only recently returned to the gym.
Yeah.
Because I had a skydiving accident. So what a lot of people won't know about me is that as an introvert, I'm a massive risk taker.
Yeah. Very true.
I love taking calculated risks, right?
Well, back in the day, I said to you, I persuaded you to go to Phuket and do a bungee jump.
Yeah. And skydiving is less scary than bungee jumping.
Yeah.
Right?
It is.
And part of it is the stats show that, you're more likely to get hurt bungee jumping than skydiving.
Also, it's the ground rush, because when you're doing it, the ground's coming up so much more quickly to you.
Yeah.
And which I found bungee jumping always a lot more scary than skydiving.
I think the scariest part of skydiving is the ascent of the plane.
Yeah, going
as it's going up, right?
Because you're talking yourself out of it. Like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this?
I was in a small single engine plane with a hole in the wall.
Yeah.
Right?
That plane you did in Vegas, that was like, I think the plane made it more scary.
It did.
Because it was
Right.
so
I mean,
tiny.
ultimately, I was very safe, right?
Yeah.
It was a tandem jump. There was a very small Latino special forces guy.
Yeah.
He had to be very small because I'm very big, right? And there's a maximum weight for a parachute,
Yeah.
right? So, and he was just telling me, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. You're going to be fine. And sure enough, I was fine, but I did get a little bit of an injury. We landed and it was gravel. So I landed on my feet, but my feet slid. So I ended up messing up my tailbone. And that's kept me out of the gym for the last year.
But you're hopefully back in action now.
I'm hopefully back in action.
We'll talk about Vegas. Talk about the time where you and I we've been in Vegas together a couple of times. But the first time, I said to you, you're not a big UFC fan, but you're a poker fan. And I've never been gambled or done anything. So I said to you, look, I want to go to the UFC. I want to watch a big world championship fight. And I think it was July 4th weekend. It was that period.
It was,
right.
Yes.
And you said, fine, but we've got to go out and play blackjack and go the night before.
Yeah.
Right? So you've just arrived. I was already there with the wife and kids, and my kids didn't believe you were there. I said, Uncle Elton's here, because we lived in the US at the time, and you had
That's right.
And then they said, Uncle Elton's not here. And I said, no, put it on the phone. My kids, it's Uncle Elton. So you said, I'm a bit tired, or we're knackered, the wife's knackered. And I said, don't be soft, mate. We're only in Vegas once. And we met downstairs. We were staying in the Vidara. Tell them what happened when we went to go and play a bit of blackjack.
Well, years later, now that I'm actually, financially trained and understand these things, you play blackjack like a trader.
Do I?
You play blackjack like a very safe trader, right? And that is, if you lose your money, that's fine. The moment you make your money, you put that part aside, but anything above,
Yeah.
let's go, baby, right?
100%.
100%,
Nothing to lose, right?
And it was really funny because I think without knowing what you were doing,
Yeah.
Lady Luck was just on your side, right? That evening.
And I had a lot to drink. I remember because they were passing out free drinks.
That's right.
I'd never been in a casino playing blackjack before.
Yeah. And the next day I'm walking by the same table and the dealer there looks at me and goes, where's your friend hits on 16? Which if you play blackjack is, is not something you really do.
But we both did all right. We made quite a few grand that night, right?
Yeah, no, we did. We paid for the hotel, all right? It paid for the hotel.
No, that was
No
brilliant.
complaints, yeah.
So if you could play poker with any player, dead or alive, right? A poker player, who would you go with?
Oh, wow. That's a tough one, really.
Well, as in, you've got a little bit of money. You're not scared about losing it. So you could, Phil could be there or whatever, but you've got some money, but you just want to experience. It's like if you could play tennis, for me, it would probably be with Pete Sampras back in the day, or
Right.
Agassi, right? But poker, who would you go with?
Probably Phil Ivey.
Yeah.
Right. Just because he's really good at what he does, and it would be interesting because everyone always talks about the mystique of someone, right?
Yeah.
But when you watch it on TV, you don't really feel it or see it. So I'd be very interested to see what being across the table from that feels like.
I'm sure.
Right. And if you said I don't risk losing anything, so that's okay because there's no way I win.
Yeah. Unlikely. What about if you could work out with anyone? Do a session of weights.
Oh, wow. I don't know. I find workout to be a very singular exercise, right?
Yeah.
I'm always in my head. I've got my earphones on. I'm not really thinking.
You don't want to talk to people, right?
I don't want to talk to people, right? And for me, it's not about vanity. I don't care if the person next to me can lift more than me.
Yeah.
Right? That's not it anymore. What I care about is when I hit 70 and I'm, going on a nice holiday back to Vegas, I can lift that suitcase into the overhead compartment.
That's
right?
what it's all about.
That's all it's about for me. So, I'll work out with anyone who's fun, who's interesting. I think I'd be interested with working out with someone who was successful at what they do, but had never been at a gym before.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Right? Probably that. Yeah.
I think the one interesting thing is when you sit down across a room from someone, and because I've had a lot of people be a bit cheeky on the phone, but when you meet them in person, it's a little bit different.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that always puts a smile on my face. What about if you think a little because you still hold a Maltese passport?
Yes.
Do you think you'd ever go back and retire there? Have you ever thought about that? Or
increasingly doing what I do, you spend a lot of time talking to people about retirement.
Yeah.
which means you spend a lot of time thinking about retirement.
Yeah.
And when I was 30, I used to say I want to retire by 40.
Yeah.
You know, I feel sad for myself because I missed that target, obviously. And when I was 40, I told myself, okay, maybe 45, you know, and I'm giving away my age here, but I've missed that target as well. And now you sort of think of retirement in more realistic terms.
Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, I think one of the things that's come to mind is how increasingly expensive it is to retire in Singapore.
Yeah.
Right?
It's crazy.
I mean, I love this place.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I can retire in Singapore.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about, you know, where to go, right? And you've got all your traditional locations that people with a little bit of money decide to go to. And, you know, and Malta's a possibility, but I don't feel like I know it anymore.
Yeah. You'd have to go back and do it, right? And things change.
I would definitely have to go back and do a trip. But, you know, I think the cost of living is going to, you know, be the key determining factor.
Yeah,
right?
I think it is for all of us, right? Because otherwise we're just on the hamster wheel. But look, I just want to tell you, I'm very proud of you. Without sounding condescending whatsoever, you know, I've always been in your corner. I loved working with you. And then, you know, you were a client of mine for many years. So, and I don't think our relationship really ever changed. And I marvel at that, because if you think about it, it could have done. What do you think about that?
Well, firstly, I've always enjoyed working with you. And the reality of that is because it's always been simple, right? When you work with someone, whether it's a client or a candidate or a manager, a line manager, there's always an underlying ulterior motive. They're trying to get promoted. They're trying to protect their jobs. They need to close a particular deal. But with you, it was always sort of hard on your sleeve, and I know what it's about, and I know what you want to deliver, or I know what you expect of me. So that made it very, very easy to work with, right? That's the first thing. I think our relationships never changed because we've always respected certain boundaries, right? You know, and we've always kind of understood that, look, you know, business is business, right? If I'm able to close a deal with you, you're able to close a deal with me, you know, so be it. If someone else does it, it was simply because they were better, right? Straightforward. And I think that is, you know, that is why a lot of people would not understand a friendship and a professional relationship like that. Because for most people, you're working in an organization, right? You need to hit a particular target. For most people, at some point in time, they've called in a favor.
Yeah.
And if they've called in a favor, you must have called in a favor.
Yeah.
What I've loved about our relationship is I've never had to ask a favor of you, even though I know you'd always give one. Yeah. If I did ask.
Am I still the guy that you would call if your plane went down in Beirut or something, and you needed the next excavation?
You know, absolutely, right? So you know, in setting up businesses and in working, we cross paths with a lot of people, right? And people will come to me and they'll say, "Oh, you set up your search firm. You set up Jesselton Partners. Are you working with Paul?" And I said, "No." And they said, you know, they'd ask why, and I said, "Well, firstly, I want to do something on my own."
Yeah.
Right. And Paul's got his own thing, you know, so even though we're close, you know, I don't even consider it competition. You're just doing your own thing. I'm doing my own thing. And they said, "Oh, you know, is it because he's hard to work with, or are you guys still friends?" Right. Someone recently asked me, "Are you still friends?" And I said, "Look, if someone planted drugs in my bag and I got caught at a Thai border, right, like you do in those movies that they make, my one phone call goes to you, right? Because of all the people I know, you're the one person who would stop at nothing to make sure that, you know, you get me out, right? That's the reality. Of course, my wife would stop at nothing. Yeah. But I think you've actually got the level of tenacity and resourcefulness that would actually create a result.
Oh man, that's a big compliment. Mate, it's been a pleasure, you know, and I look forward to this next chapter of our friendship and see what happens. You're absolutely right. I don't see, because at the end of the day, there's pie enough for all of us. And I always believe in supporting people. I completely understand. I've had two guys that I've had the privilege of working with that are very close in unusual ways. It was you and Novid. And in fact, Novid came to work with you at Julius Baer. Novid's my brother-in-law. He wasn't at the time. And I've always felt that when you truly care about someone, you are happy, whatever their success is. And when they're struggling, we've all struggled, we're there for each other. And I find it interesting because the way I look at it is like we never played sports together. If we were in school and we played football together, for example,
I would have crushed you.
Well, you wouldn't, because we'd have been on the same team.
No, obviously
no. But my point is the way I see it is we would have elevated the team together. And
absolutely.
And it's funny because I had a conversation with Novid once, and we went fishing, and he and I are into some of the same things. So, for example, he's an avid fisherman. I'm not. I enjoy it, and so he's a better fisherman than me. Right? We went and we're on a boat, and we were diving, not spearfishing, but we were trying to see how far we could go, and he could swim probably 3 times the depth that I could, which is crazy because he smokes. But he said, "Are you surprised I could do that?" I said, "Not really. I didn't really think about it." And I think everyone thinks because I'm so competitive in certain environments. Well, what I've learned is, there are things that you do unequivocally better than I can do them. I'm not even thinking like that. And I realize that you have to allow people, you have to put a feather in someone's cap. You have to put them forward. And a lot of people don't do that. I notice with a lot of managers, they hire B-rate people to distance themselves, to insulate themselves at the top. Sometimes that's a clever thing and a wise thing to do, but I've always just wanted to work with great people that are brilliant at what they do. So that being said, thank you. It's been a pleasure, man.
You're most welcome. Thanks for having me.
Good man.
Yeah.
Speak soon.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers.